Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. In a world driven by distractions, noise, and constant stimulation, the path to self-mastery can feel like walking through a storm with no compass. We seek control over our minds, our habits, and our emotions, but often we find ourselves defeated not by the world outside, but by the battles within. Today, I want to talk to you about 10 subtle but powerful hindrances that quietly erode our capacity for self-mastery. These are not just psychological barriers. They are spiritual, mental, and emotional walls that separate us from our highest potential. Let me begin by highlighting 6 core insights, keynotes that will shape the way we look at this journey. Self-mastery is often glorified as a final destination, a moment when we have made it, conquered all weakness, and stand in full command of our lives. But that idea is misleading. True self-mastery isn't about reaching a flawless state of perfection. It's not measured by trophies, titles, or achievements. It is not the absence of struggle, fear, or distraction. Rather, it is the art of consistent alignment, a conscious effort to bring our thoughts, emotions, and actions into harmony with our deeper values and principles. You see, achievement is external. It is often about doing, acquiring, or building something measurable. But alignment is internal. It's about being. It's about knowing who you are at your core, what you stand for, what matters to you, and then making daily choices that reflect that truth even when no one is watching, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. A person aligned with their higher self might not be the loudest in the room, might not be the most celebrated, but they walk with clarity. Their yes means yes, and their no means no. They are not swayed by every opinion or trend. They don't perform for approval. Their life isn't a collection of reactions, it's a series of intentional responses rooted in purpose. That is the essence of self-mastery, to live from the inside out, not the outside in, to be guided by inner wisdom rather than external noise, to move through the world not trying to impress or outperform, but to express truth in thought, word, and action. And that requires constant adjustment. Because life is dynamic, emotions shift, situations evolve, desires change. Self-mastery, therefore, is not a one-time achievement. It is a living practice of realignment, again and again, moment by moment. The most dangerous barriers to self-mastery are not the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, not the obvious enemies, but the subtle habits, unchecked thoughts, and unnoticed compromises that slowly take root in the background of our lives. Hindrances do not arrive with warnings. They don't knock on the door and announce themselves as obstacles. Instead, they slip in quietly, often disguised as comfort, convenience, or even common sense. A single excuse repeated enough becomes a belief. A small indulgence, when left unexamined, turns into a pattern. And patterns, over time, solidify into identity. That's how hindrances grow, not with force, but with familiarity. Not in chaos, but in comfort. The human mind is highly adaptive. It learns to normalize dysfunction when it's consistent. If you ignore discipline once, it's easy to tell yourself it's no big deal. But if you keep ignoring it, your mind begins to rationalize it as part of who you are. The hindrance has now taken hold, and because it happens so quietly, you don't even recognize that you're off track. You just feel stuck, frustrated, or unmotivated. And you don't know why. These hindrances live in the silence of unawareness. They grow strongest in the spaces we don't examine, like the daily routines we never question, the emotional reactions we never reflect on, or the justifications we always use to avoid discomfort. We often think we're in control of our lives, when in reality, we may just be repeating invisible patterns we never stop to confront. What's more dangerous is that these hindrances often wear a mask of reason. Procrastination looks like rest. Avoidance looks like it taking a break. Indiscipline hides behind "I'm just being flexible." We don't even notice the grip they have on us until the cost becomes too high, until time has passed, goals are missed, peace is lost, and we no longer recognize ourselves in the mirror. What allows these hindrances to thrive is not their strength, it's our silence, our failure to pause and observe. Our habit of running from reflection. Without attention, they gain ground. Without awareness, they control direction. The truth is, self-mastery is rarely destroyed by external failure. It is most often eroded by internal neglect, by the things we allow to slide, the truths we avoid facing, and the moments we stay silent when we should be listening in. One of the greatest misconceptions that hinders self-mastery is the belief that we are our minds. That every thought we think, every emotion we feel, and every impulse we experience must be a reflection of who we are. But this is not true. The mind is not meant to be the master, it is a mirror. It reflects the world we interact with, the experiences we've absorbed, the conditioning we've inherited, and the fears we've cultivated over time. It's a tool, not a truth. Every day, thousands of thoughts pass through our consciousness. We begin to believe that every anxious thought means we're weak. Every angry thought means we're bad. Every doubtful thought means we're incapable. In doing so, we allow the mind to dictate our identity, our choices, and our direction. But self-mastery demands a different approach. It calls for a shift from identification to observation, from reaction to reflection. When we learn to observe our thoughts without clinging to them, we reclaim power. We realize that thoughts are suggestions, not commands. They are weather patterns in the sky of the mind. Some pass quickly, some linger. But none of them are you unless you give them that authority. This ability to step back and witness the mind without being ruled by it is the foundation of mental discipline. It allows us to pause before reacting, to choose response over impulse, and to act from a place of clarity instead of chaos. It teaches us that we can feel fear and still move forward. We can hear self-doubt and still choose courage. We can experience mental noise and still remain grounded in our inner truth. However, this kind of inner detachment requires training. It's not passive. You must be willing to sit with discomfort, to watch your mind spiral and not immediately reach for distraction, to resist the urge to believe everything you think, especially when those thoughts are rooted in insecurity or past wounds. The more you practice this inner separation, the space between stimulus and response, the more mastery you gain. Because in that space, choice is born. And with choice comes freedom. The mind is an incredible servant capable of logic, creativity, memory, and imagination. But the moment it becomes your master, you become a prisoner of its endless chatter. It will replay old fears, magnify your weaknesses, and feed you limiting narratives that keep you small, anxious, and reactive. That is not the path of mastery, it is the path of submission to internal. Motivation is a wonderful spark. It's that surge of energy we feel after reading something inspiring, listening to a powerful speech, or setting a new goal. It gives us a glimpse of who we could become, fuels our imagination, and drives us to start. But motivation is unreliable, it comes and goes. It is reactive, emotional, and often dependent on external conditions. And if we rely on it alone, we will never build the consistency required for self-mastery. Self-mastery begins not when we're excited, but when we're exhausted. Not when things are going well, but when everything feels dull, uncomfortable, or even painful. That's the breaking point. And discipline is what carries us through it. Discipline is not glamorous. It's quiet, repetitive, and often uncelebrated. But it is through disciplined action, not occasional inspiration, that transformation happens. The truth is, your highest self won't be built on the days you feel great. It will be forged in the days you don't, on the days you want to quit, on the mornings you don't want to get out of bed, in the moments when your mind screams for comfort and your body begs for ease. That's the arena of self-mastery, when you act not because you feel like it, but because your values demand it. when you follow through not because of a mood, but because of a commitment. People often think discipline is about being strict or harsh, but real discipline is rooted in love. Love for your future, love for your growth, love for the version of yourself you are trying to become. It's a daily vote for who you want to be. And every time you act in alignment with that, even in small, difficult ways, you reinforce strength, will, and character. But without discipline, all motivation fades into regret. How many dreams die because someone waited to feel ready? How many goals are abandoned because the initial excitement wore off? Discipline is what steps in when emotion steps out. It is the structure that supports progress when the mind tries to negotiate its way out of effort. Because the mind will always seek the path of least resistance. It will offer excuses, distractions, and rationalizations. Without discipline, we become slaves to that internal negotiation. To be disciplined is not to be rigid. It is to be reliable. Reliable to yourself. It means doing what needs to be done, especially when you don't want to do it. It means keeping your promises to yourself long after the mood in which you made them has passed. That is where real growth happens. Not in the moments you feel powerful, but in the moments you feel weak and still act with purpose. There is a silent force that keeps more people from reaching self-mastery than failure ever could. Avoidance. It doesn't scream. It doesn't attack. It whispers, it tempts, and over time it convinces us that staying comfortable is safer than facing truth. But avoidance is not protection. It is a slow, invisible poison that erodes our potential, weakens our resilience, and numbs our inner strength. Avoidance takes many forms. It can look like procrastination, distraction, emotional suppression, denial, or excessive busyness. Sometimes it wears the mask of a self-care or a taking it easy. But underneath, it's really fear. Fear of discomfort, fear of failure, and often fear of facing who we truly are when all distractions are stripped away. Human beings are wired to avoid pain. We are drawn to comfort, predictability, and safety. But the path of self-mastery does not lie within comfort zones. It lies in the confrontation with what is hard, uncomfortable, and real. Every time we avoid a difficult truth, a tough conversation, an emotional wound, or a challenging task, we strengthen the habit of running. And the more we run, the more powerless we feel. What makes avoidance so dangerous is that it often feels harmless in the moment. You put something off for a day, you push a thought aside, you escape into entertainment or routine, and nothing seems to break. But over time, these small acts of avoidance compound. What we avoid doesn't disappear. It waits, it builds pressure beneath the surface. And eventually it shows up again, stronger, louder, and harder to control. Avoidance doesn't just rob us of growth, it steals self-respect. Every time you avoid something you know you should face, you send a message to yourself, I don't trust myself to handle this. That message repeats. It becomes internalized. And before long, it undermines your confidence, your courage, and your connection to your own inner power. On the other hand, when you face what you fear, even in small doses, you build inner strength. You tell yourself, I can handle this. I can sit with this discomfort. I can meet this challenge head on, and that shift is transformational. Because self-mastery isn't about eliminating fear or discomfort, it's about refusing to run from them. It's about developing the willingness to lean into the very things you once avoided and discovering that they hold the keys to your growth. Avoidance might feel easier in the moment, but it guarantees pain in the long run. It keeps us stuck in loops, repeating old habits, revisiting the same lessons again and again. It creates a life where we're constantly busy, constantly stimulated, but never fulfilled. Because deep down we know what we avoid controls us, and until we face it, we are not free. One of the most overlooked truths in the journey to self-mastery is this: you cannot change what you are not aware of. Awareness is the foundation of all growth. Without it, we operate on autopilot, trapped in routines guided by outdated beliefs, driven by unconscious emotion. We may be moving, but we're not progressing. We may be acting, but we're not evolving. Without awareness, we're not living consciously. We're just repeating. The mind is like a garden, constantly growing something. If we are not aware of what's taking root, weeds begin to thrive. Negative thoughts, reactive behaviors, limiting patterns. These inner weeds don't need permission. They grow in neglect, and the longer they're left unchecked, the deeper their roots become. The tragedy is that most people don't even realize this is happening. They feel frustrated, unmotivated, or stuck, but they don't know why. That's what a lack of awareness does. It blinds you to the causes behind your experience and leaves you chasing symptoms instead of solving the root issue. Real awareness is not a passive state. It's a skill, a discipline, and a daily practice. It means slowing down enough to observe your thoughts, question your habits, and reflect on your emotional responses. It means asking yourself, why did I react that way? What belief is guiding this choice? In the pursuit of self-mastery, few things are more corrosive to progress than the constant act of comparing ourselves to others. Comparison is subtle. It sneaks in through observation, envy, insecurity, and social conditioning. It convinces us that we are not enough, or not doing enough, or not moving fast enough simply because someone else seems to be ahead. But self-mastery is not a race, and it's certainly not measured against someone else's timeline. Comparison shifts our focus out. It draws our attention away from our inner compass and redirects it toward the expectations, achievements, or image of others. We begin to judge our worth by external standards. Someone else's success, someone else's body, someone else's lifestyle, someone else's journey. And when we do that, we lose sight of our own path. We begin living reactively, not authentically. Our actions are no longer fueled by our own values, but by a need to keep up, to impress, or to not feel behind. This habit is amplified in the modern world. Social media, in particular, has become a breeding ground for constant curated comparison. We are bombarded daily with snapshots of other people's highlight reels, their victories, their breakthroughs, their best angles and moments. Rarely do we see the struggle, the process, the setbacks. And yet, we measure our behind-the-scenes reality against their filtered perfection. This illusion distorts our self-perception and breeds feelings of inadequacy, even when we are growing, evolving, and making real progress. What makes comparison so dangerous is that it often leads to two extremes, either a sense of inferiority or a false sense of superiority. In one case, we feel less than others, and in the other, we inflate ourselves at the expense of someone else. Both are disconnected from true self-awareness. Both distract from self-mastery, which has nothing to do with being better than and everything to do with being better than you were yesterday. When we compare, we focus on what we lack instead of recognizing what we possess. We overlook our own strengths, our own journey, our own inner battles that we've silently overcome. We forget that each individual is walking a unique path, shaped by different experiences, backgrounds, challenges, and goals. What looks like someone else's success may not even align with our truth, but comparison blinds us to that. The antidote to comparison is self-honesty and gratitude. Self-honesty helps us confront where we actually are, not with shame, but with clarity. Gratitude reminds us of what we have, of how far we've come, of the tools and gifts already within us. When we start to measure ourselves only against our past selves, we create space for real growth. We become more rooted, more focused, and more at peace with our progress, no matter how slow or imperfect it may appear. Self-mastery demands that we silence the noise of external metrics and return to our own inner rhythm. It requires that we stop chasing validation in someone else's reflection and start seeking alignment in our own. Because the truth is, comparison will never show you your worth. It only distracts you from discovering it for yourself. One of the most persistent obstacles to self-mastery is the habit of seeking external validation, relying on the approval, praise, or recognition of others to feel worthy, successful, or fulfilled. This habit is deeply rooted in human nature. From childhood, we are conditioned to look outside ourselves for confirmation that we are doing well. We learn to associate approval with value. When we please others, we feel loved. When we meet expectations, we feel accepted. But what begins as a social survival mechanism can, over time, become a trap that compromises our authenticity and erodes our inner strength. When we constantly seek validation from the outside world, we hand over our sense of self to forces we cannot control. We become overly sensitive to judgment, easily discouraged by criticism, and addicted to praise. Our decisions become performative, shaped not by personal truth but by public perception. We start asking, what will they think? Instead of, what do I believe is right? In this state, we lose touch with our internal compass. We stop trusting ourselves. The danger of this pattern is that it keeps us emotionally dependent. When validation is present, we feel good, motivated, energetic, confident. But when it's absent, we feel lost, uncertain, and inadequate. Our self-worth becomes a roller coaster, constantly rising or falling based on likes, comments, attention, or applause. This emotional volatility undermines the stability required for self-mastery. Mastery demands consistency, clarity, and resilience, qualities that cannot flourish in a mind constantly seeking approval. Moreover, seeking validation often leads us to betray our own truth. We may suppress our opinions to avoid conflict, hide our flaws to appear perfect, or pursue goals that impress others but leave us empty. In doing so, we create a false identity, a mask we wear to be accepted. But this mask is heavy, and eventually it fractures. The longer we wear it, the harder it becomes to remember who we really are underneath. The path of self-mastery is not about pleasing others, it's about being in integrity with yourself. That means listening inward more than outward. It means acting according to your values even when it's unpopular. It means doing what is right, not what is praised. True confidence is not built through compliments. It's built through courage. The courage to stand alone, to walk your own path, to speak your truth even when your voice shakes. Validation is not inherently wrong. Encouragement, support, and recognition can be meaningful and affirming. But they should be appreciated, not required. They should be seen as a reflection, not a foundation. Because the moment your worth becomes dependent on another person's opinion, you have placed your power in their hands. And no one, not your family, not your peers, not the crowd, should hold the keys to your identity. Self-mastery begins when you stop asking for permission to be yourself. It grows when your sense of value comes from your own alignment, not from applause. It thrives when you begin to trust your inner voice above the external noise. One of the most crippling barriers to self-mastery is the absence of a clear direction. Without clarity, our efforts become scattered, our energy diluted, and our decisions inconsistent. Purpose is the internal compass that gives our actions meaning. It's not just about setting goals. It's about knowing why those goals matter, what they serve, and how they align with who we truly are. When that purpose is missing or unclear, we drift. We become busy but unfulfilled, active but ungrounded. A person without clarity often finds themselves constantly switching paths, second-guessing decisions, or pursuing things that look meaningful from the outside, but feel empty on the inside. This creates a cycle of internal conflict and uneasy tension between motion and meaning. You might be working hard, staying productive, and even achieving certain milestones, but still feeling deeply disconnected. That disconnection is a symptom of misalignment. Without purpose, even progress. This lack of clarity doesn't just affect big life choices. It shows up in the smallest details. It influences how we spend our mornings, how we react to stress, how we treat others, and how we speak to ourselves. When you don't know who you're becoming, every decision feels heavier. Every obstacle feels more discouraging, And every mistake feels like a failure instead of a lesson. There's no inner framework to process experiences through, no meaningful lens to understand setbacks. So instead of building resilience, we fall into doubt. Instead of staying consistent, we become reactive. Purpose acts as an anchor. It allows us to weather emotional storms, to keep moving even when motivation fades, and to endure discomfort with grace. It transforms struggle into discipline and repetition into devotion. People who are clear about their why may still experience fear, fatigue, or frustration, but they don't lose direction. Their clarity gives them a reason to persist, a reason to say no to distractions, and a reason to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. But discovering that clarity doesn't always come in a moment of revelation. Sometimes it's a process, a gradual unfolding through reflection, experience, failure, and curiosity. It requires solitude, honesty, and patience. It asks difficult questions. What am I truly here to do? What do I stand for when no one is watching? What am I willing to struggle for, even when the rewards are not immediate? Most people never take the time to ask, let alone answer these questions. They live by default, not by design. And that unconscious living becomes the breeding ground for dissatisfaction and regret. Clarity is not about having all the answers. It's about having a direction you believe in, even if the path is still forming. It's about knowing your principles, your values, your core intentions, and letting those shape your choices rather than the noise and expectations of the world around you. Without it, self-mastery is impossible because mastery without meaning becomes mechanical. It may look impressive from the outside, but it lacks the depth and drive that only purpose can provide. Perhaps the most silent but stubborn hindrance to self-mastery is the deep-rooted resistance to change. Change is uncomfortable, unpredictable, and often intimidating. It asks us to let go of the familiar, even if that familiarity is filled with limitation, pain, or self-sabotage. It demands that we step into the unknown, that we become students again, vulnerable again, uncertain again. And for many, that vulnerability feels like a threat. But the truth is there is no growth without change. Self-mastery is at its core a continual. It is the shedding of outdated beliefs, unhelpful habits, rigid identities, and reactive behaviors. To master the self is not to remain the same. It is to continually refine, update, and elevate the way we live, think, and respond to life. When we resist that process, we trap ourselves in repetition. We may call it a stability, but in many cases it's stagnation. This resistance often hides behind clever disguises. It can sound like this is just who I am, or I've always done it this way, or it's too late for me to change now. These statements might feel true, but they are built on fear, not fact. They are designed to protect the ego, to preserve comfort, and to avoid the discomfort of growth. Because change doesn't just challenge your habits, it challenges your identity. And when identity is tied to past pain, trauma, or patterns, even positive change can feel threatening. There's also a psychological reason why change feels so difficult. The human brain is wired to conserve energy and maintain familiar patterns. It treats the unknown as a potential threat, even if that unknown holds healing, freedom, or power. That's why stepping into new behaviors or beliefs often triggers anxiety, hesitation, or self-doubt. It's not necessarily a sign that you're incapable. It's a sign that your system is trying to protect you from what it doesn't yet understand. But if you allow this resistance to lead, you will always live within the boundaries of your current identity. You will protect your limitations instead of surpassing them. You will repeat old cycles even when they no longer serve you, simply because they are comfortable. And in doing so, you'll deny yourself the very transformation that mastery requires. Change is not a single moment, it's a discipline. It's a willingness to question yourself, to disrupt your own patterns, to choose discomfort over complacency, and to remain open when your instincts want to shut down. It means embracing uncertainty not as a threat, but as a teacher. Because every time you lean into change, even in small ways, you stretch the borders of who you are. You make room for a new version of yourself to emerge. The self-mastery is not a destination. It's a deliberate daily practice. It is not found in perfection, but in persistence. Along the way, we will encounter many hindrances. The comfort of avoidance, the trap of comparison, the lure of validation, the fear of change, and the pull of our untrained minds. These obstacles are not signs of failure, they are invitations. Each one calls us to wake up, to take ownership, and to rise above unconscious living. The truth is, we all have the potential for mastery within us. Not mastery over others, but mastery over the one thing we can control, ourselves, our thoughts, our reactions, our focus, our habits. When we begin to confront these inner hindrances with honesty, courage, and discipline, we don't just change our routines, we transform our lives. So the real question is not whether you are capable of self-mastery. The real question is, are you willing to face what's in your way? Because beyond every hindrance lies a stronger, wiser, freer version of you waiting to be uncovered.